A warm welcome to all of you, participants from all over the world. Today we are together, part of a rich encounter, wherein we explore the possibilities to give people in crisis and distress a feeling of belonging, without pity, but with the intention to sustain their power, to stay up and going forward. I am Huguette Bijens, living and working in Belgium, and as you, in this process, I am an explorer, a pilgrim on the path of life. Stan invited me to do this welcome together, for during the preparative meetings for this summit, we became companions, walking together. I believe that walking together with a mutual respect creates interconnectedness, a process that fertilizes the soul in a world that tends to lose the connection with the soul. Let us become weavers of the web of life, wherein each person has a place, and above all, a story from the beginning of life, during all the stages of life, with the ups and downs in the flow of life. A story that needs to be told. As a story is interrupted, then we can restore the web by weaving. And as a story can be told again and retold, then a germ of a story in the story finds the fertile ground to move on. Dear friends from all over the world, let us share stories today and fertilize the ground wherein seeds can germ. That helps us to move on with interconnectedness. Dear Stan, I give you the floor with pleasure.
Thank you, Huguette. So I'm Stan. I'm coming to you from Canada, and this is really exciting. I'm really honored that Huguette joined me. You know, Huguette, we've been getting to know each other since May. Many of us meeting in Zoom meetings and from all around the world, and I came to believe that if I was ever in crisis, Huguette is the person I would want to be with. We are honored to welcome you all today to the second day of this summit. This is the Big Picture Workshop. The summit is organized to promote and support peer respites and Soteria houses as effective alternatives to existing mainstream responses for people dealing with emotional distress or life-interrupting challenges. This international online participatory conference will give people the inspiration, the tools, the resources, the networks, and an emerging community of support to bring a peer respite or a Soteria house to their local communities. So I would like to take just a moment to thank our panelists from last week. People are giving their time on a Sunday. You know? They don't have to do this, but all these amazing people. So Robert Whitaker was with us, and we're really honored. He's such a brilliant collector of information, and Avram Friedlander, and Cindy, Marty Hatch, and Katie Bork, and Rosalind Hayes, and Vic Well, and Voice Hendricks. And these people gave their time, and I believe we so appreciate it. We had a brilliant meeting last week with because of what they were able to contribute. So, you know, at last report, we have over 600 people who have registered for today. I'm not too sure how many participants we've got at present, but people have registered from 44 of the 50 states and 37 additional countries. And these include as Belgium, of course, and Australia, but also Croatia and Honduras and India and New Zealand and Nicaragua and Kenya and Singapore and Scotland and Ponoland, West Coast. I have never even heard of this place. So some people are up in the wee hours of the morning. Maybe they're going to bed late, or maybe they got up at 3 in the morning to join us. And so I'm so grateful for their passion. Now, I think, Huguette, I'm going to pass it back to you.
We are meeting today for 3 hours. There will be a 50-minute break following the panel. And this summit will continue for the next 3 Sundays at the same time and the same link as today. Please join us for each session as you are able, as we will continue to go into the nuts and bolts of working to start and support Peer Respite or Soteria houses in your area. I believe we can create together a field of mutual inspiration and encouragement by learning from each other. As I said in my introduction, each story is worth to be told. Yes, Dan?
I
Okay.
thought we had, a really brilliant experience last week, and we very ad hoc and without planning, we chose to remain open. It seemed somewhat unprofessional, and yet it was such an important thing to begin building a community of people. I think about 200 people had stayed past the first 3 hours because they were so involved and engaged. And so we're going to be planning to do something similar today for anybody who wants to stay. For me, this is probably the most important aspect of this, is the community that we're building around the world, who will be supporting each other. It's so hard to be alone in your respective wherever you are and to try to accomplish these sort of goals. So that's my thinking. I'm just really excited about the community building aspects of what we're doing, and really grateful to the people who are giving their time and who are displaying their passion and sharing their knowledge.
Yes, this summit has been organized by a volunteer planning team who came together with a shared passion for alternatives to systemic responses to people in crisis or distress. Thank you to all of those who contributed time, resources, and ideas to make this summit a reality.
Yes, we would like to acknowledge all the donors, the people who have contributed funds to this project. It wasn't meant to cost a lot of money, and so far I think we've done really well because of all the hard work that everybody's put in. But we have received, I'm not too sure how much money by this time, but donations large and small from it. You have made this possible, and we especially want to thank our sponsors. Now I'm just going to share the screen so that you're able to see this as well. Okay, and now I have to slide things around.
Eddie, can you turn it down a bit?
I'm sorry. You're able, okay, you can see the screen. So our contributors, the people who have helped to bring this together, are first of all Rethinking Psychiatry and Mind Freedom with Human Rights in the Mental Health System, National Empowerment Center, ICEP. I'm afraid I can't see that. ICEP and the New York Association of Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services, Emotional CPR, Montana's Peer Network, Intentional Peer Support, in honor of Sherry Mead, who established the world's first peer-run respite. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time with this. It didn't work out the way I had thought. Resist is a foundation that contributes money to support human rights causes. Al Galvez, who's with us and who planted the seed money. The Copeland Center and for Wellness and Recovery. People USA, and I believe I'd already mentioned emotional CPR. Thank you for bearing with me.
We would like to recognize, please note that we are recording today both the panel and the Q&A. If you would rather not be identifiable in the Q&A, you can turn off your camera and change your name. Do whatever makes you feel comfortable. Recordings of the summit will be available at the summit web page. Closed captioning is available for each session. You can now click on the CC at the bottom of your screen. Click on Show Subtitles and they will show at the bottom of your screen. You can also click on View Transcript, which will appear on the right side of your screen as a complete transcript. The closed captioning will not be perfect. Zoom has a hard time spelling Soteria and Peer Respite, for example. We hope it will be helpful for those who would like it, even to every word will not be accurate.
Feel free to make comments or to ask questions in the chat anytime. A couple of us will be collecting these questions and we'll be presenting them to Jim and to the panel during the question and answer. We ask that you keep yourself on mute until the Q&A to avoid distractions in the presentation. Once we will take a break between the panel and the Q&A and about 15 minutes so people can recharge a coffee. After we come back, if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you may turn on your camera. You will find that you are enabled to do that and raise your Zoom hand by clicking on the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. We look forward for some time for interaction, diving deeper into topics that are being brought up. I'd also like to mention that for your best viewing experience, if you just want to highlight the people who are on the panel, you can right click on an empty window if you're using the gallery view, and it will enable you to hide non-video participants. Then you will see only the panel. To get it back, you would just go up to the view button at the top right and click on that, and it will enable you to show everyone. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Jim Gottstein, who likewise I've been getting to know now for 6 months and who amazes me every time. Jim is a co-founder of Soteria-Alaska, which operated from 2009 to 2015. He's the founder and CEO of the Law Project for Psychiatric Rights at PsychRights.org, and he is the author of the Zyprexa Papers, which is so just my comments on Jim. Jim has really struck me with his Jim is a lawyer and he's one of the good ones, and his thinking is legal and he builds an argument brick by brick. It's so logical and incisive. And I wish I had a little bit more of that, Jim, but it's a quality that I really admire about you. Thank you. It's your show.
Thanks so much, Stan. You know, one of the real pleasures from participating in this is getting to know you and some of these other people that I haven't known before. And so it's been a very rewarding experience. I thought I'd start with just a little bit about how I got here. In 1982, I got in a situation where I didn't sleep, and I got psychotic. I like to say I went crazy. Some people don't like that term, but I like it better than the clinical ones. And I was lucky. I was told that I would never practice law again. I was 29, so that was also lucky. I'd already, kind of established myself. But mainly I got after a number of different ones, I got a psychiatrist who said, oh no, you can just manage this. And you just have to, really take care of your sleep. And so I escaped being, turned into a permanent mental patient and having a career as a mental patient. And and there's a 9-minute video on YouTube called Escape from Psychiatry, Jim Gottstein's story, that was pulled out of a talk that actually I gave to Rethinking Psychiatry, I think in 2012, that people can pull up. So that really changed the trajectory of my life. I had no idea this could happen to me, that my thinking would just get, totally screwed up. And so I worked on, basically became an advocate, and I haven't done a lot of, I'm not going to go into all of that. But in 2002, I read Mad in America, and it inspired me to start the Law Project for Psychiatric Rights, PsychRights, whose mission is to mount a strategic litigation campaign against forced psychiatric drugging and electroshock. And the reason for that is it presented all this evidence based from basically psychiatry's own studies about how they weren't working. And I actually got Robert Whitaker, the author, to send me all that research that he cites in it, and it's on the PsychRights.org website. But also in Mad in America, he mentioned, he talked about Soteria, the original Soteria House project, and I thought, we should have one of these in Alaska. And so, and with Susan's help, Susan Musanti is also on this panel. She is amazing and really helped put it together along with Aaron Wolf. We got it going, and it was operating for not long enough. And at times it was just magical what was happening there. Other times not so magical. But one thing is, it's really a lot of hard work, and it's really important to get good people, the right type of people who can empathize and are able to be with people, that are crazy. I talked to Lauren Moser once, and he said, kind of under his breath, it's good to get people who are familiar with street drugs because they know what it's like to be psychotic. Anyway, having Soteria-Alaska close was really one of the biggest disappointments in my life. And I'm hoping that that experience can help other people, other organizations avoid that. And that's one of the things that, really I hope to come out of this, and, in the future networking stuff. And, Stan mentioned I'm a lawyer, and so I have to say something about that. So one of the legal principles in the United States is you can't lock people up or drug them against their will if there's a less restrictive or less intrusive alternative. And Soteria, and maybe to a certain extent, and respite houses as well, are less restrictive and less intrusive alternatives. And having these available can be really critical in in preventing people from being locked up and drugged against their will. So I write about that just a little. You can see how that plays out a little bit in my book, the Zyprexa Papers. So I'm gonna finish now and start ask Al Gals the first question. Al is a psychologist in Las Cruces, New Mexico. He's a longtime member of the boards of Mind Freedom International and the International Society for Ethical Psychology and Psychiatry, that's ISEP. And Al, I'd like you to kick us off by telling us what is the key factor in making these approaches effective, and why is that important?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jim. I can also tell you that I'm part of a group here in Las Cruces that's creating a Soteria House, bringing a Soteria House to our community. So yeah, it's really important, I think, for us to understand why these work and how they work and why that's important. Because these are wonderful approaches. A Soteria House has a 60% recovery rate, a 60% full recovery rate for people who are going through really hard times. And that's much better than the conventional system. The recovery rate in the conventional system is less than 10%. And you have peer respite houses, which are places where people in crisis can go and feel safe and be supported and affirmed without being afraid they're going to go to the hospital, be sent to the hospital, be diagnosed, and subjected to a toxic treatment. So these are really very important approaches. And how do they work? Why are they effective? Well, the reason they're effective is because what is happening is we're helping people who are going through hard times. We're giving them support, safety, and affirmation as they go through the experience. We're helping them go through this experience because we understand that whatever is going on with them, no matter how bizarre, scary, impairing in some ways, troubling to other people, no matter what's going on, it has meaning in their lives. It's somehow how they're surviving and moving towards healing and recovery. So what we're doing is we're facilitating the self-healing properties of people. You know, Bob Whitaker said it last week. Human beings have amazing, powerful self-healing properties. And if we give them a chance and provide them with safety and support, they'll be able to heal. And so that's what we're doing. We're facilitating those self-healing properties. And another thing we're doing, you know, in these approaches, people aren't afraid. You know, they aren't afraid. They understand that what's going on is a movement towards growth, maybe some kind of healing, and we're supporting them as they do that. So this is very important. And when we're doing this, we're creating these approaches. We're promoting them, promoting wonderful approaches. And so we're really doing two things here. We're providing safe, humane, life-enhancing help to people who are going through hard times. And we're also demonstrating something very important to the mental health system, to the entire mental health industry. We're showing them, hey, if you want to help people who are going through hard times, this is what you do. You help them go through the experience. You don't wipe it out. You don't dumb it down with drugs. You don't get rid of it. You help them go through the experience so they can learn from the experience. And in the process, learn about themselves and become more accepting and loving of themselves, and learn how to use their thoughts and their emotions and their perceptions and their behavior to live more the way they want to live. It's all about being able to live, helping people live in the way they want to live. And so that's what we're doing. So this is a very important movement. This is a movement that hopefully will have an impact on the entire mental health industry and help them understand how to help people. And we're doing this at an important time. As Bob Whitaker said, we're sort of at a bifurcation. And this movement is going in a really good direction. But it's a different direction from the conventional system. So it's going to run up against obstacles and pushback. So we're a movement. A lot of people involved in it, a lot of organizations, Rethinking Psychiatry, the National Empowerment Center, MAD in America, the International Society for Ethical Psychology and Psychiatry, the Coalition Against Medicated Psychology and Psychiatry, the International Society for Social and Psychological Approaches to Psychosis, the Society for Humanistic Psychology. There are a lot of organizations, the Psychotherapy Action Network, that are involved in this. So it's an important movement, and I'm glad we're part of it. We're involved in it. So, you know, the way I think about it is we may not be big deals. We may not be big deals, but what we're doing is a big deal.
Great, Al. That's, I think, a perfect start to this. Natan Cohen and Tokyo Baldwin are both from AFIA Peer Respite in Massachusetts. Hi, Tokyo and Natan. With an associate's degree in criminal justice, Tokyo strives to make a positive and productive difference in the world for her daughter and all underserved communities. Natan, maybe you can say a couple things about yourself. And then if you could, both of you, describe the philosophy and principles of Peer Respite, you know, for those who may not be familiar with them, and maybe describe some of your successes and your experiences at Soteria House and some dilemmas that you faced.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Natan Cohen. I'm somebody who has been through a lot of different extreme states in my life, dealt with homelessness, with drug use, with a lot of conflict, with a lot of unusual beliefs. And Tokyo and I work with the Wildflower Alliance, as you said, here in Western Massachusetts. We were formerly known as the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community, for people who might have heard about us under that name. And so that's a little bit about myself. I guess I'll start off. Tokyo, we didn't quite make a plan for this, but I'll start off a little bit and feel free to jump in anytime. Does that sound good?
Yep, no problem.
So just for people who are not maybe familiar, Soteria is the only peer-run respite in the state of Massachusetts. We are a 3-bedroom house where people can come and stay for up to a week at a time. People choose for themselves, you know, when they want to come, why they want to come. There's no outside referral process, and people choose for themselves what they want to get out of their stay, right? So a really big part of coming to Soteria is this principle of self-determination. We don't have any kind of program. We try to run people through. We don't ask people to fill out forms saying how they're doing. We're really just there to hang out with people as folks who have been through a lot of challenges ourselves, and to offer peer support. Intentional peer support is a big part of our model, as well as the Hearing Voices approach and the alternatives to suicide approach that we developed here at the Wildflower Alliance. So a lot of that is just sitting in long conversations with people about what is going on in their lives. And as Jim and the other person who disappeared from my screen now, apparently, who was speaking, said, this is about the life that people really are looking to live for themselves. So there's no metric. I see some really great discussion about this concept of recovery and the word recovery in the chat. There's no real goal on our end for what quote unquote recovery or what the endpoint should look like for somebody. It's really up to them. And a lot of that comes also from understanding that, the problems that people are having, that we have, are not necessarily only within myself as a person, right? It's not just myself, or it's not even just about my immediate relationships. It's about myself in the context of a society and in the context of having a certain identity, right? And so a big part of our work at the Wildflower Alliance is understanding that this stuff is intersectional, that the psychiatric system has its own kind of form of oppression that it places on people, but very often that is, connected to people's level of poverty, to people's race, people's gender identity or sexual orientation, other disabilities that people may have. So people are coming in with all of these things. So people are coming to Soteria, escaping domestic violence. People are coming to get, in and out of the cold. People are coming because, they're experiencing madness, or because they want to die, or because they believe, something that people around them don't believe, and it's causing a lot of stress in their life. There are so many different reasons why people come. It's hard to kind of put it under one box. It's not even necessarily entirely about quote unquote crazy, right? But it's about the severe distress that we end up in a society and systems that are not meeting our needs. So Soteria is a place where people can, hopefully have some greater sense of stability and emotional safety for 1 week, where we can really, talk things through and help support people to get on to whatever the next step that they're trying to take might be for them. So those are my first thoughts to those questions. And then I know you also asked about successes and challenges. So maybe Tokyo, if you want to speak to any of those, or I can also come back later and speak to some of those.
Yeah, as far as just being there to stay and navigating different types and forms of trauma, and also just being able to escape many labels. A lot of people do come to AFIA already being placed in certain boxes by the labels that have been given to them. And it's just an escape also sometimes, and it's a good place to like heal and recover from that. And successes, as far as what that looks like for everyone when they stay, it varies. We actually like have papers that tell people, hey, do you want to set goals, or the things you want to do? And they can do it if they would like, but it also gives them a place to have perspective for what they want to do. It's a choice. It's not someone telling them their next step. It's someone supporting them in whatever step they decide to take. So for some people, success looks like being able to get a good night's sleep. For others, it's finding stability or solidifying a place to stay, things of that nature. It looks different for everybody, but success should look different for everybody, I believe. And what everyone's looking for when they get there is different as well. And us just being able to navigate that with them, being from different walks of lives ourselves, and having experienced homelessness myself, and having experienced different forms of coping mechanisms, and just like navigating the world and society. Those are things that sometimes you need other people with like mind, or other people who have gone through those same things, to just feel like you can be yourself. And I think that is a success for everyone, for anyone who's looking for that.
So I also wanted to say, if people want, after they're done, people want to, jump in with comments, just let me know, or just go ahead. So, and one question I have is, what is people's experience coming to AFIA House, and what would it be, contrasted with if AFIA House wasn't available to them? What would happen?
Sure. So people's experience is they have to call us on the phone and have a conversation with somebody. It used to be we would do those conversations in person. I think since COVID, they've been more on the phone. Ideally, we like to meet people face to face, though, and just talk about, so what's going on in your life, and to make sure this house is a really good fit for the person. Something that we learned, running our respite, was that it's really important that, it's just as important that the people coming to stay understand what the house is about and what the house is there for, as it is for us to understand what the person is coming for. Because sometimes people, might expect us to do things we can't do, right? Like manage their medication, or like be medical professionals, or have no boundaries. And sometimes someone's like, there's a lot of people calling, and somebody might not kind of meet the criteria that we're kind of needing to see to allow someone to have one of these rooms, because the house it's slowed down a little bit during COVID, but the house historically has been at like 80 to 90% capacity at all times, if not more. And there are a lot of times where our waiting list fills up and we can't accept people, so it's in very high demand. And we do hand out surveys for people to fill out after their stay. And one of the most common responses that we've seen on those surveys is specifically that coming to AFIA was an alternative, or prevented somebody from going to a more restrictive setting, like we were talking about, from going to the ER and from going on a 3-day or longer psych hold. So a lot of times that might be the alternative for somebody, but there's a lot of other situations too, right? Sometimes the alternative is sleeping on the street for that week. Sometimes the alternative is staying in an abusive domestic situation for a week. Sometimes the alternative, I remember meeting one person who just, she had like 6 kids and like a really, really busy life, and like things were mostly okay. It was just incredibly overwhelming. And she just needed to like have somewhere to stay and decompress and vent that like wasn't around her family. So like sometimes the alternative is just like, not going over that edge because somebody realizes like early enough that they need that extra bit of support. And we kind of see people on a huge range of people who are, being very kind of intentional and pre-planning by coming to AFIA, and people who are already in like really heightened states of crisis.
And to prevent incarceration as well. There are people who, as a result of being displaced, are constantly harassed by police and just people outside in general. And it actually is a place that is safe for them there as well. Police are not allowed to come to AFIA. We do not have them as a force there. So it isn't something that folks have to be concerned with. A lot of people have a lot of trauma surrounding being incarcerated and or just police brutality and police in general. So that kind of gives people the ability to breathe around that as well and not feel as if they will be crucified, for lack of a better term, for feeling how they feel at the time.
Super. Anybody else want to, comment on that? Okay, so Jen, are you there? I lost your video. Oh, you're back. Okay, great. So Jen Killian is the chair of the United Kingdom Soteria Network. She helped set up a pilot Soteria House, which ran successfully for a year in the UK, and I think in her house. She is now supporting the local UK Soteria groups with a view to opening several Soteria houses in the UK. Jen, we heard from Natan and Tokyo a little bit about the peer respite philosophy and principles. And can you describe them for Soteria House, for those who may not be familiar with them? And then can you tell us some of the successes you experienced and some of the pitfalls you would try to avoid in developing and implementing a Soteria program in the future?
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Tokyo and Natan. It was and Al for what you said. Very inspiring. So I've got to try and follow that. I'll do my best. So our Soteria House that we opened in Bradford in UK from 2014 to 2015 was based on the principles of the first Soteria House that was opened in San Francisco in 71, 72, yeah. But we also looked at the principles of the original Windhorse project, because our intention was to start something much smaller, because we were a very small organisation. We hadn't got a lot of funding and we wanted to start small. But the principles that we held on to were not using diagnoses, people that we chose to work there, to be there, not because of their paper qualifications necessarily, but because of their ability to sit with people in distress, be with their distress, which sounds very easy, but it isn't always. For people, they're part of the team, not coming to fix things, to do to someone, but to spend time with that person. And as Natan was saying, either talking or not talking, because sometimes people just need to be quiet, but to know that there's someone with them. We didn't use diagnoses. People had a choice as to whether they took medication or not. We weren't anti-medication, but we wanted to provide a safe place for people that didn't want to use medication or wanted to safely reduce their medication. The place was a safe space where people could come. There were no locked doors. People could come and go as they pleased. And the role of the team supporting them was to be with them and to do what they wanted to do. And some of the things that came out of it were that people said just being with other people that were doing everyday regular things helped them just to join in again and start doing not amazing things, just everyday things, being with someone and just doing a bit of washing up. For some people was very healing, just to feel that they were there, they were doing things and they felt safe. It sounds very simple, it isn't simple, but it can work and it can make an amazing difference to people. people were again always treated with respect. They were given time to come through whatever they wanted to go through. We had other people that weren't working in the house, but they were kind of around the outside of it. So if they needed additional support, or they wanted people to work with them and their family, then that was part of it too. If they needed time to or someone else to work with their family to help them understand better what was going on. And they stayed there for between 6 months and a year. And people can ask me more questions about that later. But what we found was that it was important to try and find space for whatever those people wanted to do when they left, which isn't always easy. And in terms of things that we've learned, or that I think we could have improved on, done better on, was to, we did have some good allies in the local mental health system. But I think at the time, because there wasn't in the UK as much known about Soteria, I think we were probably a little bit too cautious at trying to not work with those allies as much as we could have done. And I think if we'd spent more time working with those allies, we may have been able to continue more than the year that we worked with. That's just one of the thoughts, and probably could have got funding. I think it was really important, and I know we'll be talking about funding in the next session, but I think if we'd had funding from more than one source, I think we would have been able to carry on longer. So it was about forward planning. We set it up as a pilot project to prove that it worked, and we did do that. And I think there's still a lot that we've learned from that we're going to put into the houses we're opening now. But I hope that's enough of an introduction for you. More
That's
questions?
great. You know, I don't know if anybody else has some comments or questions, but one thing that kind of intrigues me is in the original Soteria House, as I understand it, people basically, the idea was that everybody was living together and people would come, you know, in pretty acute psychotic, or, you know, be pretty crazy. And so they had 48-hour shifts so that the staff, you know, basically you didn't have all these shift changes and which might be disoriented. And we weren't really able to do that in Alaska. And I'm curious as to whether, you know, how you dealt with that.
Well, we had 2 people living there on a very low rent. They had they could pay whatever they could afford as rent, and their job was just to be there, keep the house running. It wasn't necessarily their job to work with people, but just to be there and be a friend. And then we had a team of volunteers that came in during the day. So in some ways similar to the Soteria House, but that aspect was more like the original Windhorse House, and that worked well for us. But the people were chosen not randomly. The people that were there had either been through their own crises or been with a friend or a family member. So they were students and people working in probably as support workers in mental health services. So those were the 2 people that were in the house but came and went, but they stayed. They were there at night.
So that's great. That's different ways to do things. Voice, you have some comments or questions?
Yeah, I think it's important to hear the political context. Jen, you said Soteria, the regional Soteria in San Francisco. San Jose is
San Jose, very
sensitive.
That's different.
It's funny.
Yeah, right. It's a thing that just, you know, everybody says San Francisco for the Bay Area.
Yeah.
But San Jose is much bigger than San Francisco. It's a larger area.
Great. Yeah, that's important. So Susan Musante was the founding director of Soteria-Alaska, and you know, I just can't say enough good about her. And the first full-time director of Choices, an alternative to conventional community mental health services, directed and provided primarily by people who themselves have a, quote, lived experience with recovery. Susan, Peer Respite or Soteria House, how do you decide which model to pick? What would you consider? And also, can you describe the program at briefly about the Alaska Soteria-Alaska, and how to maintain fidelity and address mission creep?
Thanks, Jim. So first I want to start by saying I am very humbled by the people who are speaking before me. And you get, and Stan, you brought tears to my eyes, because it's always beautiful to be in a community such as this. And I hope we have, I hope we can reach out to the folks who aren't kind of with us, because they don't know what can be, and we do know what can be. So I just want to say thank you to you and Jim and Al and everybody. And I see one of my colleagues, Eliza Eller, also on this call. And she was one of the founding board of directors for Soteria-Alaska. Real quickly, a little bit more about myself. I worked in a state hospital. It was not my life's vision that I would be doing this, but somehow Soteria and other alternatives, including peer support programs, has become my life work. I didn't mean for it to be, but it did. And I was working in a state hospital in the 70s, which is when Voice and Lauren and everybody was starting the first Soteria, and I had no idea. I never heard of that, but I had a bachelor's degree in psychology, and the only job I could get was what in those days they called the psych aide in the state hospital. And on day one, I realized that I really wasn't that different from most of the other people who were there without the keys. I could really relate to them. And I worked on an admission unit, and husbands could, back in the day, husbands could bring their wives in and say, my wife is crazy, and then they'd medicate them. It was really horrifying, really, when you think about it. There were some really good people there, I'm not saying that, but in general, the system was really bad. And I saw people get electroshock. I saw people with such bad tardive dyskinesia that they could barely talk. And I always said, if I could ever do the alternative, I will do it. And then I started getting emails from PsychRights about, passed on to me from other people, that there was a job in Alaska. And I was like, I'm not going to Alaska. And then somehow in 2006, I came for 6 months to write a business plan. And I'm still there. So, but Soteria isn't, and that's one of my greatest disappointments in life. So the question that we posed was, how do you pick? Should I do a Peer Respite? Should I do a Soteria House? And I would say they have shared principles. Like I heard Nathan talking about experiencing people within the context of their lives and who they are and their environment. And one of the things we always looked for in Soteria was for people to work there would be people who had contextual thinking and people who can be with in the same way. So there's very similarities in the values and the way these programs go, but they are very different programs. And a Peer Respite is, by its name, a peer-run program. Soteria houses are not necessarily so. Our Soteria house had a psychiatrist attached to us, and that was important because it's hard to actually find people who are neuroleptically naive anymore within the age range that we were serving, because kids are getting medicated at such an early age. So we were experiencing that challenge. And it's in fact, we did hire a lot of people with lived experience, and our board of directors were 2/3 by our bylaws, 2/3 peers, but it wasn't a peer, it's not really a peer model. But it morphs into that, in my opinion, at least the ones I've seen and that I was involved in. So I would say, you don't pick a Peer Respite over a Soteria house. you have it all, really, because a Soteria House, the original, and I'm sure Voice will speak to this, the original Soteria House was for newly diagnosed people, and because in the 70s you could do stuff like this, I don't think you can do it anymore. They came to the hospital sort of, and you'd say, do you want to be in this research project? And if they said yes, they might get to go to Soteria House, or they might stay in the hospital. I'm not sure that would fly right now, but I'm sorry to say I don't think it would, but it was brilliant, but it was a different time. So I would say it's Peer Respite is for everybody who's in a situation that's not conducive to their well-being. I mean, I heard you talk about people with domestic violence, people who are homeless. And so rather than being diagnosis-based, you're talking about situation environment based, and that causes people distress, which is also true of the people who come to Soteria House. I wish that I could have, if I'd known about Soteria in San Jose, did I get that right? If I'd known about Soteria in San Jose, I would have bailed out as many of these ladies that I worked with in the state hospital and put them on a bus and gone to San Jose and begged you all to bring us in. But I didn't know about it then. And that's why we need to help everybody know about it. But it's not one or the other. It's kind of like we need it all. And okay, so one of the pitfalls, I think you asked about pitfalls, Jim, and mission drift and fidelity. The book written by Lauren and Lauren Mosher, Dr. Mosher, and Voice, Soteria Through Madness to Deliverance, was our Bible. We read it, the staff read it, we read it together. We did trainings on it. I wouldn't call them trainings. We'd have conversation about what all of this meant. And being with, we use this, Soteria people always talk about being with, but nobody really understands. You almost have to experience. It's really hard to describe it. You have to experience it. And we had a lot of visitors who came. Grace was one of them. That's how I met Grace, and a bunch of other folks came to visit with us. Somebody from UK, Nick, I think worked with you probably, Jen, right? Nick Putman came to study and be with and understand what this was. And that's really important because it's hard to describe. It's hard to say what contextual thinking is, although Nitin, you did a beautiful job of it. It's hard to describe being with. And so you asked, what is the program and what about fidelity? Well, people always ask me, what is the Soteria program? Well, there is no program. That's the whole point of it. There's no program. People come and the house changes all of the time. The house changes based on who works there and who's living there. It's very adaptable. It has to be, because we're in response to not just the people who live there, but the people who work there. And many of the people themselves healed by working there. And again, I don't have 4 hours to describe that, but I'd love to. So anybody can contact me anytime. I believe that one of the main reasons that the Soteria-Alaska is not still around, and I'll say this, is that I think that we had mission drift people talk about, but really I think that sort of the vision got a little muddied. And I think we're going to talk about funding next week with Jen, but when I talk about sustainability, I'm not just talking about funding. I'm talking about making sure that you remember the purpose and don't just chase the funds. And we'll talk in specifics, but I do agree with Jen. Soteria-Alaska lasted 8-ish years, I think, and we had mixed funding. So we had state, we were lucky, not lucky, with the efforts of, that's when I want to acknowledge Jim and Eliza and Aaron Wolf and everybody who went to the state legislature. And we got actually a line item in the state budget for Soteria House. And since we were the only ones who were doing it, we got that funding. And it was as simple as that, but it wasn't simple. It took 2 years at least to get that funding in the budget, but that didn't cover the whole cost. And so, you know, we had to go after other funding streams. So that does change. You really have to be diligent about understanding what your vision and your mission is. And that's all I'll say. And I think I've gone over probably my allotted time.
I think we're doing good on time. So Morgan, you had some comments, I think. I see your hand up.
Yeah, so again, I'm gonna repeat what everybody else said. It's amazing to be on this panel and to hear everybody else's perspectives. And but I did just want to clarify, Susan, you mentioned that peer respites are always peer run or peer operated. That's not always the case, unfortunately, and that's what makes research so challenging in peer respites, is because some programs will open and be what is referred to as peer operated, which is not an advisory board of 51% or more of peers. And that makes it challenging. And it also is confusing to people. They're like, oh, I've been into a peer respite, but really it wasn't, because it was not peer run, excuse me. So just to clarify that there are some programs out there that say they are peer run, but are not actually peer run. And it can be.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that, because I made the assumption that peer respite means peer run, which is, and Soteria, which actually oddly comes out of a medical model, although it's not really a medical model, but it has a psychiatrist, you know, it's got some of that. And, but the ones that I've been aware of that I think are actually the most successful have lots of peers working in them, but it's not like a pure Soteria, it's Soteria. So thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, no worries. It's a huge confusion in the research world too, trust me.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, the names are interesting. I mean, and you know, and with the question of, you know, which one, and I think the point both is good, but you know, I think the big distinction is, you know, respite is respite. So it's by definition kind of short term, whereas Soteria House is really designed to, you know, let people be there as long as it takes, as long as it's not too long, but months, you know, to get through what they're going through. And I think some people, you know, actually felt, you know, so good and safe and so much better being there that you kind of actually had to move them out the door, you know, and get on with their life, which I think, especially when you read Soteria, the book, Through Madness to Deliverance, you get a good feel for that. So,
hey Jim, I just want to, could I just offer one correction or clarification?
Please.
That, you know, within, at least here, you know, this may not be true for every peer run respite, but here in Western Mass, you know, our peer run respite is directly connected to a broader community of support. We have 4 community centers, you know, dozens of support groups. We have a Discord server. There are a lot of ways that people, you know, continue to be engaged in our community for very long periods of time. And they might come and stay at AFIA, you know, once every 5 or 6 weeks over a period of months. So it's not just like a one and done necessarily, or disconnected from a longer term process. Ideally, I guess, at least in the way that we do it. I know some peer run respites certainly are, they're only the respite, and that's pretty much all that they offer. But I think that they're, yeah, that broader community of support is also a big part of how we function. I just wanted to make sure people were aware that that kind of model exists.
Oh yeah, that's great clarification. I'll get with Susan in a minute, but I also want to just mention that the Wildflower Alliance, formerly known as the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community, is really, I think, an incredible organization, and in this array of you call them services, I kind of hate that word, but this array of supports that they give people is amazing. And you know, frankly, I think it's a model. It could be a model for people to look at for what a, you know, total system should look like. Any other? Okay, and so
I'd like to add one last thing.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So Soteria, Alaska, I can speak mainly to that. Soteria, Alaska, Jim referenced the fact that people didn't really want to leave, and some people didn't want to come because they had never experienced anything like it. And you had asked earlier somebody about the difference between hospital and Soteria, and one of our residents, I asked her what she, you know, what was the difference, because she'd been in the hospital, and she said, I couldn't believe it. When I walked in the door of Soteria House, there wasn't like a glass window with someone sitting on the other side to greet me. It was like a house, and that in and of itself. But the community, I used to call it Soteria without walls, because the community was more than just the people who lived in the house. And we had people come back all the time, visit. We had Tuesday night pizza night, and people would just drop by. We had Fridays, we had like everybody came together for a meeting, but we made a big lunch. So there was a whole community for even the people who moved out. And that's actually what helped a lot of people move on to a different way of living, not in a group house, but in their own apartments or whatever. So, and that's, there was a community that just continued on. So, thanks.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, what you're describing is kind of like, the idea was for it to be a normal life. You know, that people, just because they're going through these things doesn't mean that they shouldn't, you know, experience normal life. And that was one of the goals of Soteria-Alaska, and I think Soterias generally. So Morgan and I really, is it Palo or Pelot?
It's Pelot. It's nothing like it's spelled.
Okay, so I should have asked before, so I apologize for that. So Morgan is a research program manager for Live and Learn, Inc. She leads the Peer Respite Essential Features Survey and the Certified Peer Specialist Career Outcomes Study, and also involved in actually setting up and running peer respites, as I understand it. First, I'd like you to summarize some of the research around the success of peer-run respites, and then the same question of how did peer respites maintain fidelity and avoid mission creep?
Yeah, so I do want to clarify first. Sorry, I did not set up a peer respite at all. I don't want to take on that responsibility of saying that I have. I've just worked at one. And I worked for about 2.5 years as an on-call peer respite support staff, and then I became a permanent staff. But I've worked with a lot of peer respites and talking with them. As you mentioned, I work for Live and Learn, and we do a peer respite essential features survey every 2 years, where we collect data about the day-to-day operations and guest policies of peer respites across the United States, because there is such little research on peer respites. So I'll kind of start there to say, like, there's a lot of research out there that says that peer support is a great thing and very beneficial to individuals, and that's basically what peer respites are based on, is peer support. So there's a lot of research in that aspect, but again, where we get down in that nitty-gritty of what is actually a peer respite, because there's a lot of studies out there that say, oh yeah, we've learned this from peer respites, but they're actually, again, peer operated, not peer run. So I will say that, you know, to talk about some of the success of peer respites, it kind of depends on what we're defining as a success. Because if we're not asking the peer respites, what is success to you, we can't study it correctly. If you want to know, are they helping individuals through, you know, the experiences that they are experiencing? Yes, we know that. But I do want to point back to Natan's point of it. There needs to be an understanding of what the program does, because there has been research that guests have stayed and they didn't like the free form environment and not having the structure of an authoritative, you know, psych nurse or whatever it may be. And so that's not going to be a great place for someone that needs that authoritative, I don't know, sense of security, I guess. So yes, for people who want to use peer respite services, they are helpful. And so that in a way is measuring success. Do they cut costs and reduce emergency psych services? Yes, there has been research that has provided support saying that they are helpful in that aspect. Because if we think about it, peer respites are kind of this middle ground, right, between outpatient services and, if we're talking about traditional mental health, because they are not traditional, but if we're talking about the traditional mental health spectrum of outpatient and psych service, or you know, psychiatric hospitalization. So they're kind of filling this gap of the in between. And so yes, they're definitely doing their part there. And then, you know, are they being utilized? Yes, this is where I really support and advocate for peer respite.
So let me, okay. I think Ty just got it going again. All right.
Sounds good. So, you know, are they being utilized? And this is where I was going to say that Peer Respite's doing their own evaluation and giving the Peer Respite and the staff at the Peer Respite the control to decide what kind of evaluation tools you want to use are really important, because there's research and data that supports Elysium, I think that's how you say it, which is in Vermont, that they, you know, always have a wait list and they're always being utilized. And those are things that are proving that people want to use the service. So again, another example of success. And then again, are they serving the role that they are intended to serve? I think that comes down to, and that leads me into my mission creep idea of, you know, as Susan had mentioned, I think it was Susan, maybe it was Jen, that if you're so open and saying that you don't really, if the program's constantly changing, that can have issues in itself. There needs to be some kind of defined, like, this is what we are, this is what we offer, because otherwise you're getting pressure from the overall system, right? Of, hey, I have this person that I don't have a placement for, can you take them? Well, that's not really what we're here for. We're here if the person wants to come in, or the idea of outside pressures from funding, you know, oh, well, again, you need to fill your beds all the time. Well, that's not really the purpose of the program. So being clear in what the mission of the program is an important idea, like an important step of avoiding mission creep and, you know, keeping the program to what it's meant to serve. I can also speak to a couple other areas of pressure that peer respites face from the community. If they have a non-traditional parent organization, which some people are like, whoa, that's not a peer respite. If the advisory board or the board of directors is 51%, that's our definition of a peer run respite. But yeah, I think that it's just really important to maintain the idea and then also support the staff, because, you know, if you get into this issue of not really understanding the staff role, I think that's one of the highest areas of burnout in peer support, is not understanding your role and having this really weird, confused boundary. In our certified peer specialist study, we're hearing a lot of that from individuals, of people saying that they've had to restrain people and provide medication. That's not a peer role. So, you know, just being very clear about the overall of what it is, and communicating that with the community, of saying, you know, we are here to fill a gap and we are here to fill this role, but this is the role that we fill, and just staying true to that for staff, for guests, for the whole program in itself.
So I'm really glad you mentioned this, you know, putting people in restraints, and maybe, you know, in the wider, you know, peer support world, I hear a lot of questions about, or concerns about, basically the peer support role kind of being co-opted by this system, and, you know, and peers having to, do, you know, quote, medication compliance, and as you say, begin people on in seclusion and restraint. And so have these kind of problems crept into the peer respites? And I mean, to me, that would kind of vitiate, you know, the whole concept of peer respite.
So for my experience of working at one and what I know of the ones around the United States, no, because Peer Respites are pretty adamant about saying like, that's not what happens here. Like you said, Jim, it is when you get into these mixed models of traditional and peer support services trying to merge, especially if that parent org is more of a traditional mental health model. There's that pressure of, well, this is what we do in our company, and this is what the peer staff is also going to do, even though, again, it's not at all in the peer role to do that. And if you're one peer, if it's just a checkbox that the organization's trying to make of your one peer support staff in this whole thing, how are you going to advocate and say that's not my role? So I don't think that it's been experienced in Peer Respites. I would say that the programs that are peer operated, I always get those terms confused, so I have to think about it, but peer operated, where there's peer staff, but the directors or whoever are not peers, I would say there's probably a conversation that tension that happens, but I feel like Tokyo and Natan, please feel free to jump in as well on that, of if Peer Respites experience that pressure to medicate or restrain.
As far as a FIA is concerned, we don't actually have we don't medicate anyone. We just, if people have medication, we allow them to use it as long as it's something that they keep with them on their person. Because obviously some people do come and stay that have substance use history or issues, if you will. But we don't actually make it a necessity. So it's something that people choose to do. And even as far as substance use, we don't discourage people from using substances. We just ask that they not have them at a FIA on the property. And that they not use anything on the property as well, or like their behavior, if they should partake in anything, doesn't disturb the healing environment as it is. So we try not to restrict anyone in that way. And as you said, as far as like lack of structure in that way, sometimes it is hard for folks because of things like that. Some people prefer that there be some terms or like conditions in place, so they're regulated in that way. But and we have experienced that as well, folks just not needing that at that time, needing like that lack of structure at that time. So we do have that too. We encounter those same things, but we don't force anyone either way. We just support the decisions that people make as far as whether or not they'd like to take medication in general.
So, one of the things, that really strikes me about all this is for someone who's not familiar with kind of this way of thinking in this world that, those in this group are, is, does this really work? People think they have to, that society has to control these people and tell them what to do and make sure they, are restrained and all this. So when you talk about this, I think a natural reaction would be, does this really work? So any response, Tokyo? Natan?
Yeah, I mean, people say that it works. People say that this works for them. People like, as Morgan mentioned, there are occasionally people who, even though we try to explain to them really thoroughly, who we are and what we do beforehand, they arrive and they're disappointed that there's not groups, so there's not more structure. But otherwise, I'd say a solid like 90-95% of our, the surveys that we get back are people saying, hey, this really worked for me. I'm really glad that this was here and not some alternative. So I think like, the proof's in the pudding as far as that goes. I mean, it's sometimes when the question is, does this really work? Right? It's like, what kind of information do people value? What kind of information are people looking for? Are there like a lot of these like highly structured studies that like measure certain metrics over time? Like not so much right now for Peer Respites, maybe someday there will be more. But in terms of, people's actual individual lived experience, people keep coming back, we're always full, people come back over and over and over again because there's something there that is really working for them.
Well, Jim, I mean, it even works in terms of the traditional systems or the conventional systems criteria. So, the original Soteria House, and Boyce can tell us about this, it was a research project. It was funded by the National Institute for Mental Health, the schizophrenia section, and they did a very good study. And they compared people treated at Soteria, I'm using the system language, people treated at Soteria with people treated at the hospital. And when you went and checked after 1 and 2 years, the people who were treated at Soteria were doing better. They were doing better in terms of rehospitalizations, symptoms, social functioning, and employment. So even in terms of that criteria, the criteria of the traditional system, these approaches work better than the traditional approaches.
From my point of view, who worked in both systems, that essentially I was the person, probably the point person in the state hospital to deal with that putting people in seclusion, get with forced medication, although we had a reputation as being the person least likely to do that, but still our role was to come in and put someone in seclusion. There was not one person at Soteria that ever went in any kind of forced to do any seclusion. There was only one person we physically had to take back to the crisis unit, and this is the person who stole a gas truck and tried to run it over a cliff. And at that point, it was pretty, I'd hate to say it, but there's almost sometimes in the system you see people who eventually going to commit suicide. They tend to eventually do it. At maybe 1 out of 1,000 people, but that have this person when he was in hospital almost committed suicide in the locked unit, almost committed suicide 3 times within 2 weeks. But we took him anyway because he came up to Soteria, and we kept him for 4 months. And there was that one incident that we felt was too risky at that moment, and we felt we needed to have him in the hospital for at least a few days to try to get some. But that was the only incident where we had to force what I would consider force someone to comply to anything in that sense.
Thank you. Can I add one thing? So so in some ways, Bob Whitaker answered this last week, and I think the question is, why do we continue to support things that don't work? Like, it's clear that electroshock really doesn't work. It's clear that locking somebody up in a hospital where there's trauma involved is not working. We're not having good results. We do know from the original Soteria studies, and also Soteria-Alaska didn't do with a control group study, but we did program assessment, had very similar results. People went to school, people got jobs, people, with or without medication, it works. But I do know that the powers that be do want to see numbers and research, and so I'm really glad, Morgan, that you're doing that now, and that'll help sell these things. Al Gals, he's working with legislators to try and get a Soteria and others allies to get a house in New Mexico. The more research he can bring to them and say this stuff works is going to help him get funded to do it. But the question really that I think Bob asked Robert Whitaker asked last week is, why do we keep funding things that aren't working? That's a question.
So Morgan, I see you have your hand up.
Just briefly, I know this is going onto like a whole nother, area, but so I just want to make 2 quick comments. One is this question of does it work and everything. And I just want to bring it back to the fact that I feel like the system as a whole is always trying to find a one-size-fits-all. That's not mental health. I mean, I think of everybody that's attending and everybody even on this panel, some people might say that medication has worked for them, and that's great. Some people might say medication has not worked for them, and that's also great. So, again, it just goes back to the fact of, what is the person seeking? What is the service offering? And is that a match? Because if not, then of course you're going to have data that says, no, this doesn't work. But again, it's figuring out this works for some people some of the time. And what are those situations, and who are those people? Not like characteristics, but just, they have to be open-minded to the idea and stuff like that, or wanting the type of program that it is. And so that's the first point I was going to make. And the other point I was going to make is that, Voice was talking about accepting this person who they kind of figured they shouldn't be, which goes back to, again, advocating for what the program does. Because if a staff, and this is only speaking from my experience working at a peer respite, we have to be honest. If we bring this person in and we have other guests that have conflict with this person, you know, unfortunately, this isn't a good time for you to come in right now. And that's just something that staff sometimes have to do, is like, you know, we can't offer you the support that you need right now, or the situation at the house isn't appropriate, you know, and it's difficult. And it kind of, it really arches on that like hierarchical issue of like staff to guests, because we are supposed to be equal and everything. But again, if you're bringing someone in who is potentially going to cause issues for another person who's already in the respite, I, again, don't want to speak to Afia's experiences, but this is what we experienced at Second Story, is that, you know, you just have to be conscious of the system as a whole, of the house as a whole. And so, you know, is this a good time for you? We can't bring you in right now, or you have to go on the wait list or whatever, but these are some services and support that you can get from now. You can come to this or that, you know, something like that. I don't know if that made sense. I hope it did.
Yeah, that's great. I've been looking at the time. I think we go till 45 minutes after the hour. So I think we're, you know, really right on track time-wise. And I want to bring you in Voice Hendricks. Voice was a former house manager and co-founder of the original Soteria House from the 1970s, and co-author of the book Soteria: Through Madness to Deliverance. And Susan kind of said this, but I also wanted to mention that if you want to me, it was just an amazing book, and it really gives you the feel of what it was like to be at Soteria House. And so one of the things, Voice, I'd like to ask you, I mean, because not everybody's going to read the book, you know, can you tell us what it was like, you know, day to day in the original Soteria House, both, you know, and did you have problems remaining faithful to the program's design, or, you know, that since it was a study, it was a program design, but, you know, in other words, philosophy and principles?
This is important here because it's the question seems simple, but it's extremely complicated. The design, when you say design, Lauren actually, in order to get to the grant, he designed a program which essentially stated you would have an elderly couple living in this house, living there, and during the day you would have staff come in and work with the resident, what we call later residents. That was the design, and that was the only design, which tells you nothing. So essentially, we got hired, and we're sitting in the first day in the room, looking at each other. What are we going to do? We had no idea what we got. There was no models. There was the Kingsley Hall in London, which was sort of a model out there, but we had no real idea what we would actually do with the question you say day to day. That didn't exist. We had 3 weeks to train ourselves. And what that 3 weeks involved, we had people like the head of the Jungian Society of the United States came in 1 day, to train us about Jungian ideas. We spent a weekend at Esalen, which they have all these powerful therapists there, and sort of, I'm not even sure what happened there. These people talked to us, but it had no really relevance to what we were going to actually do. And then the other thing that's probably the most helpful, and were the concept of visual, that you hear about Soteria a lot, the concept of visual, being with, and where that term being with comes from, is there was a study going on at Agnew State Hospital. It's the California State Hospital. It was probably the most progressive hospital in the state at the time. We spent probably up to 6 hours to the staff. Me and, for instance, me and another female staff would find a patient in that study at the state hospital, and we would take him to a room, and we would spend 6, 7 hours with him, just being with, no expectations. And there's something, I mean, even though by then I've had 10 years of working with people who with a diagnosis of schizophrenia, but there's something different when you sit with someone with no expectations, and you just have to be with the person, the whole person. And you have to start figuring out what you're going to talk about. And then within 6 hours, you find that you have a whole lot in common, all three of you. It becomes you get connected in a way. And that for some reason had a very powerful impact on the first resident to be admitted to Soteria. Which, to explain, in fact, I feel sorry for her now. And we had like 6 or 7 staff, 4 of them were living in the house, and she comes in the house, and she's using the terminology of the time. She was delusional, hearing voices, word salad, all that kind of language. If you look at a chart, that's what you saw in it. And to communicate with her, it was just, you know, that you didn't make sense, but she was so much fun to be with. And the house, you know, I didn't live there, but I actually, within that first 4 days, spent at least 16 hours a day there at the house, and everybody else did. We just sort of bombed her with it. And it's amazing how just being with someone allows them to sort of interact back and forth. But the point is, we didn't have a model, we didn't have anything to model after. And what happened to Soteria is this process of being with, you learn how to just be with people. And if regardless, whatever they're going through, it becomes normal eventually. And they start interaction. The key thing that we noticed at Soteria is that sleep itself. A person can be, I don't know how many times I've seen this, person could be up 2 days, you know, completely, and go to sleep for 8 hours and wake up, and they'll be totally rational for about a half hour. And then this goes back. And that process over time, that thing just gradually changes, it becomes normal. And that thing we call delusion stuff just tends to go away and has nothing to do with medication. It just goes away. And the study showed it goes away about the same rate as they did the people at the hospital who were medicated. Symptoms track almost exactly the same. Being on medications, not medication, the hospital, the control group, 100% of those folks were on medication. So we're talking about 2 different populations in terms of the way people going through the process itself. So, I mean, it's this kind of thing that happens at Soteria. And like I said, I think the other thing, I forget, Morgan, yeah, you suggest that, you know, the system constantly changing. You have to worry about mission drift. I think what Susan was saying, but if you came to Soteria any particular time, a lot of it would look drastically different than it did became a month later. And it has to do with who was at the house at the time. For instance, when I talk about Soteria, I talk about there's about 5 different phases of Soteria. The first one is that the chaos, that the first year of Soteria was essentially chaotic. There was no structure. For the first 3 months, we had no staff times when people came to work. It was just open. It was deliberately said, they're open. You come when you felt that you need to come and that. So, and that evolved and went through all kinds of different things. Within 4 months, we had realized that everybody started getting burnt out, that something had to happen. Then we started the different phases, different ways. And the last one that really sustained for the probably last 10 years of the study was the two staff on for 2 days. And what we found, the difference between that and say for people come in 8-hour shifts, when you come in 8-hour shifts into when I went to work at State Hospital, I showered in the morning, I got all cleaned up, and I got all dressed up, and I walked into the ward, and the patients there saw this person all put together, and they come up and say mean things when I can handle it, and I'm nice, and I can, I can deal with it. And I can. At Soteria, after that 24 hours, and you go sleep, then you get up in the morning, and you go drooling on your mouth, and your hair is all messed up, and someone, you tend to be you, the real you, not the you that's all dressed up. Then you go home and kick the dog when you get home after work to get rid of your stuff. You have to deal with that when you're at Soteria. It was so plain and obvious. So that model stayed from, once we started, it stayed till the end of the process. It worked. So it's kind of hard to talk about Soteria in any rational way in a few minutes, but the things that that's another thing that with listening to the other folk presentations, that Soteria was different than the peer model. In some ways it wasn't. We had a lot of peer support. Everybody who became a part of Soteria a lot of them came back when they were in crisis and hung out and went through things and were able to, in fact, probably the most powerful example is that we had a woman who went through Soteria and came out, really strong, and she was executive secretary for someone in business, and about a year after she had left, she came back one day and she was hanging out and having dinner like a lot of people do, just hanging out, talking about the good old days and the war stories and all that. And, like 10 hours later, she's still there talking about war stories. 12 hours later, she's still there. It's 12 o'clock at night. And it's clearly something more than she's just there there's something going on with her and when it came out that she announced that her mother had died. And what we encouraged her to do is spend the night, and there was a bed open, and she spent the night. And the next morning she called in and didn't go to work. But the morning after that, she stayed the night and she went to work. And actually that lasted a whole week. She went to work from work and eventually just went back home. But essentially used Soteria as a respite. That happened a lot at Soteria. That was the most extreme example. Usually it happens that they were there for a day, spend the night, sometimes just for 8 hours or so. But that is a common way that people use Soteria. Because if you think Soteria as the 6 resident and the 2 staff as being Soteria was a community of people. And that was the sort of the center where all the activity defined as Soteria happened. But Soteria was really happening in the broader community, and people interacted with each other outside of it without ever coming to Soteria. So when you describe Soteria as a system, it's complex and it's hard to put, what is Soteria? Soteria is creating a community of support in a broad sense. And so, and like I said, it changes over time. And the mission thing about, it didn't happen in any meaningful way at Soteria. It was different at times. It felt different, but it really had that being with, not doing to, was a consistent element of the project that kept it centered, and which becomes very important.
So that's really great description and information. And one of the thing that really strikes me is how grateful I am and how much we owe you and other people there. But I know you were really, you and Alma men. But my point is that you know, you're going through what you call the chaotic stage and figuring out how how to do things and what worked, and then writing it, you know, in a book and stuff is really a tremendous gift to the rest of us, you know, for which I think probably we're all grateful. So to bring us home, Bert Mooney was a resident at the original Soteria House. And he
Yes.
says it was a blessing to have a safe environment to go through the changes that he experienced and with the staff who were there, and later went to college at San Jose City College and had a successful 35-year career in laser measurement. And so to kind of bring us home here, I'm just wondering how, you know, I mean, that says a little bit about how, you know, how you feel about it. But my question is, do you feel being randomly assigned to Soteria House rather than the psych hospital made a difference in your life? And if so, how? In what way?
Well, at the time, I didn't know I was randomly selected. I was at the psych ward in San Jose, and my dad had brought me there. He found me in an orchard after being up all night, and I started talking about all these spacey things and whatnot. And he took me to a counselor that eventually took me to the psych ward. And I'm on the psych ward, and then a voice shows up. And he says, hey, we have this house you can go to, and it's I think you might have mentioned it was non-drug, and it didn't talk about the house a lot, but you know, voice was this big teddy bear guy, and I just felt this immediate attraction to him as a almost like a father figure, and took me to the house, and I felt very comfortable there. You know, the doors were unlocked. People weren't walking around with keys in their pockets and stuff like that. And no one was forcing drugs onto you. So the Soteria gave me that opportunity to go through things in a comfortable environment and with somebody. I mean, I developed relationships with a number of staff members, and went through a thing. I think I put the staff through the hell at times, because talking about being up and no sleeping, I stayed up for a whole week and going through, I would call it, spiritual processes of me, the greater part of me, kind of guiding me through these things that I didn't understand at the time, but I just kind of let it roll. And having that environment to do it in without being forced to do anything. Obviously, psych ward, the first thing they probably do is pick you up and throw you on a bed and medicate you. And Soteria, they just were with you and allowed you to freely go through these things that you go through. So, yeah, Soteria was a blessing. I didn't actually know that I was diagnosed as schizophrenic for a long time. I think maybe till I actually read the Soteria book. But yes, it was a blessing that I had that place and the people there that I formed relationships with, and like I said, the good voice said, the community of Soteria. I came back 2 other times later in my life when I was 21 and 25, and went through a similar thing for a whole week, and I was just lucky to have that place and the people there to go through those things.
So great. So one of the things that I guess we haven't really talked about that much, and I'm just going to kind of throw it open. It is, you know, what are there suggestions on how to organize in your community to get a Peer Respite or Soteria House going? And you know, maybe there's some people that kind of could. You know, more, you know, in this arena than others. So I guess, you know, I'd ask Jen, if you don't mind, You know, what are your thoughts about how to organize in the community to get this going?
Did you say me, Jim?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Well, we spent quite a long time building up a group of people, local people who were really interested. Some of them had had their own experiences of being hospitalized, or family members, or being with a friend. So it was people that kind of knew why we needed something different. And we decided that we wanted at that time to raise the money ourselves without any statutory funding. So we spent probably quite a few years. We set a target of how much we needed to raise, and we raised that money ourselves. And at the time, I think that worked very well, because then in the UK, there wasn't that much known about Soteria houses. So there wasn't the same kind of knowledge and support out there, really. And I think that time, working together, fundraising, getting help from lots of people who had lots and lots of support, but it was more sort of local community support. And we were very lucky that we had some really good people supporting us. People like Rufus May, some of you may have come across, and Phil Thomas, who was he calls himself now a recovering psychiatrist. Now he's retired, but he helped set up the critical psychiatry movement in the UK, and he actually had brought Lauren Mosher over on a speaking tour in the UK, so he already knew a lot about Soteria. So we had some good local people like that who had a lot of experience, and others that supported us, and we did a lot of work together on what being with means. So we did a lot of time with each other, getting feedback on how we were with each other, so that when we started the house, we'd already got a good team of people that knew each other well and trusted each other. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but that's how we did it. And because we were sort of, through the fundraising, we felt that was also awareness raising. So through that, we'd actually got a wider group of people that were supporting us in different ways. And we made connections with people working in what we call the early intervention service, and people who were what we call AMPs. These are the social workers who have the power to detain people. So we had some, as I said before, we had some allies in good places who were there to support us in a kind of, I won't say undercover, but unofficial way, so that if we had we felt there were any difficulties, we had a range of people that we could call and help us. So it was a bit of a kind of underground movement, but it was in touch with the what we called our allies working in the local services. And I think because of that, I think it really worked. Not saying that would work for everyone, but for us, because we've got an established team and a community, and we found the people that came, as I mentioned before, came to actually live in the house. All of it came through connections. It sounds amazing, really, but we didn't have to advertise for anyone. I'm not saying that would work for anyone, but for us, because we developed that kind of wider community. I think it worked really, really well, and I think we learned a lot from it. And as I think Susan was saying earlier, a lot of the people who were there as volunteers, and we had a paid coordinator, there were what I would call some positive, unintended outcomes, where people who'd gone as part of the team because they'd had their own experiences actually managed to get voluntary work as part of it, and went on to get employment. So there were, and many other examples how people learned a lot from it and went on to do other things. So it wasn't just the people who the people who you might have called the residents, we call them Soterians because we didn't know what else to call them. So as well as the Soterians, I felt everyone learned a lot and gained a lot from it. And I think it's still with me now, as hopefully you can hear. It was an experience.
It's great. I mean, we're kind of at our allotted time, and for a break, I feel like I could go indefinitely, but I do think we need to give people a break. But Morgan, you had your hand up. If you could, I'll give you a minute, and then
yeah, I'll make it quick. Talking about how to get started in organizing a program, I'd say the biggest thing is to utilize the resources that we have and lean on one another, right? If you're interested in starting a peer respite, start conversations with existing peer respites, because, as Jen said, and as we've talked about a lot, this isn't going to work, or this might not work for every program or every person or whatnot. And so that's what makes research difficult, because research likes to do the stamp of this is generalizable to everybody, but that's just not realistic in this situation. And so if you speak with programs that are already existing, they may have collected their own evaluations and data and stuff that can say, this is what we've shown, as AFIA collects surveys on guest experiences and whatnot. And again, you get to choose it. And so it's, I think that's not to, continue to repeat myself, but programs need to do self-evaluation so they can choose what they want to show and study, and then have that information to spread to others that want to start programs. Because that's where the research and support is going to come from. So I think I went over my minute, but I'll shush now.
No, that's great, actually. And this idea of, networking and finding out from people, that's really what we're going to try and do on day 5 is, how we're going to go forward and support everybody in making peer respites and Soteria houses, maybe other alternatives to come into existence and keep going. So I think we need to give people a break and come back at the top of the hour. So I thought what we do is get a couple questions from the chat, and then if people want to raise their hands, to go ahead and raise your hands, and I'll call on them. So Stan, do you have, go ahead.
I just have a comment. I've been monitoring the chat, copying and pasting. It's been kind of difficult following both the conversations that have been going on the screen, but there's a lot of emotion, a lot of passion, a lot of really helpful information, and a certain amount of tension, all of which I noticed. I think there's so many questions. We're not really going to be able to answer all of them today, but a lot of the questions will be answered in the course of the next several days, up to the nuts and bolts pieces. And I think that's all I got to say. Stay tuned and keep coming back, because these are really complicated answers. As someone who supports others, every person is unique and needs a unique experience in order to be helped. And that's what we're seeing here. Thank you.
Great. And I also want to say that my understanding is I'm going to, I think, have to leave pretty close to the allotted time, but we're going to keep the Q&A session open for probably at least an hour afterwards for, people to continue to work, together and talk to each other. But let's go ahead and start with the Q&A. And Stan, do you have a question from the chat that you might ask?
And yes, Jim, I have, single spaced, I've got 16 pages of Word document of questions. So, it begins with, I think.
So that reminds me of an old logging saying, if you you know, if you take the easiest tree next, then you're always working on the easiest tree. So maybe this way, you know, if you can, you know, pick up what you think is a really good question, then we'll have really good questions.
Yes, you're right.
Not that they're not all good.
Okay. Rachel, by the way, you're there also, and we might need some help. So,
I see while you're looking for some questions, Louise, I see you have your hand up. Did you have a question? You're muted.
Unmute. There you go. Yes, I'm okay. I'm okay. Yeah, so there you go. I'm there. So I just really wanted to partly just comment actually, because do you know what, when in the chat I've seen stuff which I think the trouble is we're also we've dealt with this medical language so long that it's very hard in some ways to describe what people are wanting and meaning without veering back into the way that we've always been shown. And it's about coming up with different words and different language. I think we're all on the same page, but the trouble is you drift off into, you know, people think you're talking about daycare or dependency. And actually, I don't think there's any of that. I think it's just there's this, we're so used to, I mean, I'm 63, I've been in the system for 40 years. I've now come out, I'm in withdrawal now from medication, which is great, but it's hard to kind of almost leave that behind into a new way, and to think of things, ways of describing how you feel things could be done, like day support or whatever, without other people thinking you're veering down those routes. And so that was really just my comment, really. But also my feeling is as well about something, there was a conversation about diet early on. And I think what we've got to be very careful of is so much of this is all about what the person wants. And somebody may have an agenda about diet, but that doesn't suit everyone. We all go down different routes, different things. And so what we've got to do is listen to what people want, come alongside them where they're at, to understand what they want and what they need. It's not about saying one way of doing things is actually better than anywhere else, because it's not. We're all individuals, and that's what psychiatry system doesn't recognise. It tries to make us all fit into one model, and it doesn't work, and that's why it's so broken. And I'm glad I'm out of the system now. I've just left my job in the NHS because I realised it's so broken that I was becoming angry with staff. And when I had a medical director talking about doing interventions on people, and I thought, yes, I'm a physiotherapist, I used to be, and I put bags of ice on people. You do interventions with people. You walk alongside them. You don't do them on people. You don't do OT or art therapy on people. And the trouble is that's what's wrong with the system. That's what they believe. And that's where it's so wrong. It's about, we're all individuals. This is why my last comment was, you know, somebody said, yes, we're broken, cracked. No, I'm not mad. I'm not broken. I'm not cracked. Never have been. I've got a lot of emotional trauma, which they're now beginning to realise that was medicated, not treated. But I'm a creative. I'm a creative embroiderer. I'm unique. I'm me. I'm a logical creative. I've got that dichotomy, that paradox. And I'm me. I'm unique. I'm not mad. I'm not broken. But I love that kintsugi Japanese thing of a broken vessel, which they repair with gold, making it more valuable than it ever was before. And I suppose that's what we're trying to do in some ways with this Soteria network stuff. Is it all? It's about viewing that person as an individual, coming alongside them and valuing who they are, where they are at this moment. And I know my psychologist at the moment is so frustrated that I do need some more help. I need somebody to come alongside me, to support me, to get going again after the bloody pandemic and lockdowns and stuff. but I fall through the gaps, and he's so frustrated. So yeah, so I don't view myself as mad. I view myself as individual, unique, special. I'm a creative embroiderer, but I've lost it all at the moment. So yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you know, those are really great comments, and yeah, it's amazing how the normal system doesn't ask people what they want. So Morgan, did you have something you wanted to say in response?
I was going to say, I know it wasn't a question, but I wanted to say that I think you hit the nail on the head of that some people have these ideas. And I don't mean some people, I just mean it could be anybody. It could be, you know, your friends or even peer staff have ideas that they think is the right way. And it's not, that's not the peer role. As you said, Luis, the peer role is to walk alongside and ask, how can I support you? What support do you want? But I've witnessed it myself. Even some of my fellow peer staff, when I worked at the Peer Respite, were very anti-medication, and that's fine for you, but you cannot force that idea on somebody else if it's working for them. So I think that, yeah, you really hit the nail on the head of peer support, and Soteria and Peer Respites are meant to be this, I'm going to walk alongside you and you're going to direct the path.
Yes, and I think what's been particularly interesting to me is our lead in our trust psychologist, who is open dialogue trained. He was a clinical lead as well in that. And he said to me one day, he said, Louise, when I'm with you or online, as we're having to do, he said, I can see your pain and it's dreadful. He said, I find it really, really difficult to watch and see. He said, but all I want to do is reach out and offer you a quick fix, something else. He said, but actually, if I give you space and time just to be with you while you're going through it, he said, actually, by the end of the hour, you've worked through it yourself. I don't need to tell you anything, you've worked through it. And actually, we're sharing a joke. And actually, the psychologist I'm working with regularly now, he initially wanted to start with all the, I don't know, the schema therapy, but he's now seen that as well. But actually, he doesn't need to do anything, but just give me a safe space to just be and unload and offer me that unconditional safety, not knee-jerking to things I say, but just allowing me to work through it. And that's building trust with me and him, is that I can say anything at all, knowing that he's not going to call the COVID, the amps around or anybody else and get me locked up. He'll give me space to talk through things. And it's about just being, walking alongside somebody, allowing them to work through things themselves. And that's what, for me, this is what this does. Yep.
Great. So that's, I think, great comments, and absolutely true. Stan, do you have a question from the chat or otherwise? You're muted,
Stan.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a number of questions and comments regarding the use of the word recovery. And it occurs to me that, you know, back in 1971, recovery wasn't really even a concept. And today we see a co-optation of the word recovery-oriented programs and all the like. My understanding, and I think many will agree, is that recovery is unique to each individual. But how do you approach, maybe we could have a bit of a discussion about how people see recovery within their unique programs, because each of these efforts is unique and has a unique understanding.
Susan?
So I think language is really important, but I also think it's important for us to be able to understand each other, even the folks who don't speak the same language. And so I've thought a lot about this, and I think about, actually Bill Anthony did a really nice, out of Boston University, about looking at frameworks, that there's a medical framework and they think about things this way. They're not necessarily wrong, but they're different. And then there's like the rehabilitation framework, which I was sort of brought up in. And then there's like the recovery framework. And the recovery framework is different because it's basically the person is the person, I can't recover somebody else. I can only whatever that is, right? So it is kind of, it's a little loosey-goosey, like being with. We're not sure what it all means. But I also see different ways of that people talk about recovery. Again, it's a language thing, but you know, when some people talk about recovery, they talk about recovery, like the person is recovered. This is maybe a little more medical model, but no longer have what most people would call symptoms. Some people call a spiritual experience. Some, you know, they no longer have that. They maybe don't take any medication, and they have like role recovery. So they're like living their lives, whatever that is for them. But then there's like, I think this comes kind of from the 12-step recovery, is there's like, I'm in recovery forever. So it's like a lifestyle. It's the way I live my life. I live in whatever way I choose, whether it's 12-step or spiritual recovery. It defines partially the way I live my life. So it's like living it. And then the other one is, I call it the miracle. Like, you can't predict when somebody's going to recover or what that is. And one day, after whatever experiences, and I believe that peer respites and Soteria type programs help people do this. It's like they go through it, and then one day they're like whole again, or even I think Louise said it, put back together with gold. So they get extra credit for having that lived experience. So that's kind of the way I think about it. But I do believe it has been co-opted, and I'm seeing all these programs that are calling themselves recovery oriented that really are not. And that again is sad for me. So the language, it changes the meaning, but that's how I think about it. So right or wrong, that's me.
So Boyce, I saw you had your hand up and then put it down, but did you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I was just gonna recover for Soteria. It didn't exist when the Soteria started, but it did at the end of it. And it never made sense in that context, because it's been my position, and I think a lot of people at Soteria, that they weren't recovering from what? It's not, you're not broken, you're not, there's, you know, you adjust. I used to sometimes say you're adjusting. I went through some of this and you're adjusting, but recovery to me is like that whole thing of it that we use as independent, like that language. You know, I need to be independent. And my say, and I've said this before, the most independent person is the hermit. Not the most successful people are interdependent. That's the power of Soteria. One of the goals of Soteria is, you know, you may live in your house separately, but you're interdependent to the Soteria community and the community at large. Independent is not a positive thing at all. But in the back in the social rehab movement time, this is in that late 70s and 80s, that was a bit powerful to get people to live independent, and that's problematic to me.
Great. So Rachel, do you have a question from the chat?
Yes, there were a couple of questions that I think were kind of similar that can be kind of consolidated. So, excuse me, several people asked about if somebody at the Soteria House or Peer Respite program is doing something that might be, you know, against the house rules, like it could be saying disrespectful or derogatory things to someone at the house, or you know, not cleaning up after themselves, or potentially doing something dangerous or that could be considered disrespectful. So basically, how is that handled if somebody is doing something that other people at the house might find disrespectful or disruptive?
I guess I could start just because I know overall peer respites, because we ask about policies such as, do you accept people who are actively suicidal or self-harm, or you know what you so definitely depends on each peer respite program. They have their own set of rules. I know that when I've worked at a Peer Respite and Peer Respites I've talked to, they're more like guidelines. It's not like if you don't follow the rules, you get kicked out. And from what I know of our data, because we ask, you know, what do you do when you know, these tensions arise? And a lot of Peer Respites just say that it's case by case, and it starts with a conversation of, you know, when you arrived here, we let you know kind of what our guidelines are and kind of how the house works, and you know, not like you've done something wrong, but we just want to understand, you know, where you're coming from and why you might be doing the things that you're doing. So that's what I can say from the survey aspect of it. Of we know that a lot of times Peer Respites are, you know, not cut and dry, like you've broken the rules, you're getting kicked out, but more or less having a conversation with individuals of, you know, especially if it's a thing of safety, right? So if it puts someone else's safety at risk, of just having a conversation and saying, can we, you know, mediate this? Or if it's with another guest, can we talk this out and whatnot? But I will definitely let others speak to it as well.
So Voice, you have a comment?
I noticed there was one of the participant, not the participant, but here was Gene Larkin. He was one of the early staff at Soteria, and he was really one of the more important staff at Soteria. And I can't find him. He's probably left already, and I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Oh, that's great.
He was somebody that was really good, and he and I, at the most critical point at Soteria, were the two males there that had to really, I think, hold the program together. It almost folded. And he was one of the key people to let that not happen. Unfortunately, I think he's gone. So,
Jim, I just wanted to mention, not everybody's reading the chat, but anybody who wants to be part of the Q&A now, you can turn your camera on, you can raise your Zoom hand, and we'll alternate between in-person questions and questions that have been put in the chat. Thanks.
Eugene Larkin Eugene Larkin is there and could speak if you'd like.
Okay, I got to unmute here, figure out. Okay. Oh, am I on?
You're on. Yep. You're unmuted.
Okay, no, just appreciation to Voice. I mean, Voice and I worked together, I don't know, a year and a half, whatever it was. The Voice, I got to tell you, is one of the most patient, calming, good people I have ever worked with. I've worked in like at least 5 programs at this point. I don't think we ever disagreed on anything. I don't know if it was ever a matter of agreeing or disagreeing. We just worked together, very nice. He was just a rock. A very gentle rock at all times. I always looked forward to him when he came in because he did the day shift and I would do the overnight shifts. So just thanks to him for acknowledging that. But I want to tell you just how wonderful Voice was and how much we all counted on him. And that's about all. Thanks.
So thanks, Gene. It's really nice of you to join us. And I think it really illustrates an important point is of how important, you know, selecting people who can really deal with the situation. And I have to say that Susan was brilliant at that at Soteria-Alaska. And did I see that you wanted to say something, Susan?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't find my raising my hand on the Zoom, so I'm raising it in the camera. Sorry. But so I wanted to respond to Morgan answered the question, and I wanted to respond from a Soteria perspective, which was because Soteria took on, as a community, it became defined by who was there, that there were never hard and fast rules, but sometimes the community would say, we need to have some kind of a rule about this because it's not working for us. And sometimes it was stuff like cleanliness. Sometimes it was, you know, people were not appreciating the way they were being dealt with by other people who lived in the house. And everything became what we called a house meeting. So it was a conversation. Nobody came in from above and said, we're going to make a rule. And we always talked about it, and also I'm gonna, she's no longer with us, but Elma Men helped me with this as well. She said, you will have endless meetings about who's going to do the cleaning. And we did, because somehow that's like, it's symbolic of life. Who's going to clean the house? It's just symbolic, right? You know, when you live with a group of people, whether it's family or other folks, but we had endless house meetings, and if there was an issue, we would just have it. And then sometimes we would have people who didn't participate in the house meetings, and our way of being with is that we would try and have the house meeting, say they were in their room and they weren't coming out, so that they could listen, but they didn't have to participate, but they could if they wanted to. They could open their door, they could listen, but they didn't have to. And that was actually particularly effective. And if that person was the problem, the identified problem person, somebody might say their name, and I would always say, you know, James, I just want to let you know, somebody's calling out your name, but you can hear us if you can, if you want to, join us if you want, but this is what we're talking about. It was always a conversation, and oddly, they always resolved themselves over a period of time. So yeah, not oddly, I would expect it.
Great. So Luke, do you have a question? You have your, there you go.
Yeah, okay, I couldn't unmute for a moment there. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, I have just a couple of things to address, and a question for the crowd. Insider shout out, by the way. I am a Taoist as well, and that is reflected in my tradition of wellness support.
Great.
Oh, the continuum, the eternal flow. And then to a shout out to Jacek. Recovery in the substance use addictions community in our peer world is an issue, and that's why I want to also coin this when we're talking about mycelial networks. Regenerative processes is an alternative to recovery. So just going to complete on this note. The Reconnecting with the Earth for Personal and Global Healing tradition has a huge focus on merging permaculture with wellness support. And so I think we just identified today in this event that recovery is one option and regeneration is another. I have recently been connected with the Global Regeneration Collab folks. This is huge. So we're gonna, from here on out, be experiencing a huge renaissance. Bless you. Oh yeah, here's my reconnecting with nature, of course.
Great.
Right here. Thank you.
Yeah, those are great points, and so important. So Stan, do you have another question from the chat?
I have a couple of one that caught my eye. Someone referred to people who speak in alphabet soup. I think that sometimes it's also called clanging. I guess we begin to develop this hierarchy of people who are easier or harder, or I don't know how we evaluate those things. I personally, I don't make a distinction, you know, and I can sit with someone speaking in alphabet soup and talk to them. And sometimes just to confuse them, I'll start speaking to them in Polish. But how do we deal with folks who may appear to be kind of hard to reach, hard to communicate with?
Susan?
I can offer a thought on that one.
Oh, okay. Who's that?
This is Natan.
Natan? Okay, go ahead, Natan.
You know, I've been in support spaces with a number of people, you know, who are considered to be, I think the favorite term that I heard from a clinician once was floridly psychotic. And, you know, it just has not and you know, and maybe also as like as a reference point, like I have 2 children who have a lot of like alternative like ways of being verbal and kind of trouble expressing themselves in the usual way. And I don't know, like I personally have never had the problem where like if I really sit with somebody and you know, ask some questions that are relevant to what they're saying, maybe it takes 15, 20 minutes, maybe it takes up to an hour, where I can't find some really deep, like relevant meaning in what they're saying. And I think a lot of the time, a lot of that comes from either impatience or a place of there being too much tension or conflict in that relationship for meaning to arise. But I know that like in the Hearing Voices movement, you know, we talk a lot about people's beliefs, forms of expression, sensations they're describing, you know, as being relevant and meaningful in the course of their lives. So, you know, one example that I give, you know, maybe this isn't, you know, I don't even know what people call word salad or alphabet soup, because frankly, like I've almost always been able to pick up on at least a phrase or two where like there's meaning I can follow up on with somebody. I don't know that I've maybe experienced what I imagine that to be or what I see it looking like in the movies. But you know, one example I give is someone came into our space, you know, talking about just kind of like, you know, lots of little fragments, being really angry about, you know, dark magic and like bad things happening and how they were trying to stop it. And, you know, it only took a few questions to get at something, you know, really really pertinent in that conversation. You know, I validated that there was something they were upset about. I asked them, you know, if this black magic was coming from any place in particular. And they said, yeah, that housing complex, this project on the edge of town. I said, oh, wow, okay. And have you had any other experiences there? And it jumped right out of like, you know, half an hour of ranting about black magic to, yeah, the landlord there is, you know, an a-hole. And like, I got evicted and they kept my security deposit. And it's like, it's a mess over there. So, you know, that's just one example that really stuck in my mind of like, I literally had people coming to me for weeks saying, we don't understand what this person is talking about. How do we support her? And I found out what she was talking about in like 5 minutes. Because like I was patient and curious and really actually cared about what she was saying instead of just dismissing it as being word salad or alphabet soup.
Curiosity.
Susan?
So I agree with everything Nathan said, and I really appreciated that you kind of respond to the feeling, because there's usually a feeling behind it. But I was in a state hospital meeting one time with some, it was a family meeting, and there was state staff there, and the individual was there about whom the meeting was about, but nobody was asking her opinion, of course, like happens. So, but somebody asked her what would, at some point, it probably was myself or one of my staff asked her, well, what would you like? And she started talking about not having, it wasn't as logical as most people would like it to be, but she was talking about not having underwear, only having access to state underwear and really wanting to be pretty again. And basically she was saying, I want to be able to get out of here before I'm so old that I can't get a boyfriend. That's really what she was saying, but she focused on state underwear. And the state personnel said, and Jim, you know this person, but you knew this person. The state personnel said, well, we can take you to the store or go to the store for you and buy you new underwear. And I knew that's not what she was really saying, but I didn't want to like go crosswise to the state people. But at some point, she stood up in the chair and then just got as rigid as she could be and went over. And she was responding to, you really aren't listening to me. And then, of course, they said, see, you are delusional. You're not ready to leave here. And that's unfortunate, because I would have said, I think it sounds to me like you're wanting to get a boyfriend and get a life. And, you know, but the other thing that I did learn is, and this is where Natan is right on, is if you just listen, and that's the problem. People don't really, we don't listen because we think we don't understand them. But if you just listen and you're there long enough, and then someone gave me some words to help me with this. And it has always worked for me. If I really can't understand what the person is saying, I say, I really am having trouble understanding you, but I really want to, can you say it in a way that are a language that I understand better? So they make it about me. Like it's my problem that I can't understand you. Can you help me by putting words that I would understand? So speaking Polish isn't that far off, because maybe that's making that point. I'm not sure. So anyway, those are my non-wise words, all I have to offer on that topic. But I feel like I do speak schizophrenia. That's what I call it sometimes. So thanks.
Yeah, just to be clear, the gentleman I was thinking of actually made up his own language. And this is the condition that's known as clanging. It made sense. It had structure and syntax, and it was obviously punctuated. His speech sounded like, to me, it just sounded like he was talking Greek, but the words were in his own mind and they were incomprehensible to the rest of us. And that's why, because it would bring him back. He would recognize when he couldn't understand me, what I said when I said, I can't understand you. And he was able to return to English, and we could continue our conversation.
So I think the point here is, and I do think this is something that Peer Respites and Soteria's type programs hold, is authenticity. And, you just be authentic. Like, don't pretend to be somebody you're not, and just say, I'm sorry, I'm not understanding this, but help me. It's my problem, but you can help me with it.
Great. So I see hands up, but I also don't want to, I know there are I think there are a lot of questions in the chat. So Rachel, do you have a question from the chat?
Yes, somebody said that Voice had talked about the importance of sleep. Does anyone have any resources or ideas for people with extreme sleep issues that don't involve medications?
So, I mentioned this. I don't see anybody else responding. So this was my issue, is sleeping. And if I don't sleep, then I get in trouble. And actually, if I'm at the point, and I talk about this in my YouTube video, so I won't go into it. But I will say this, is that I try, well, first off, I will take something to sleep if I'm really in trouble. And usually just for one night to reestablish it. But I can go a year or more. I think it's been a couple years since I took anything. But I really try and arrange my life to avoid it. So as a lawyer, so for example, you write briefs, or you have deadlines, and you can always make it better. You can go through it another time and make it better. And lawyers almost always go right up to the deadline. But for me, that causes me to think, keep thinking. I can't turn off my thinking. And so I try, and that I almost always will file something the day before it's due. And then, other people find meditation helpful, exercise. So there are things that you just have, can do, and you have to figure out for yourself, I think, on how to do sleep. But I'm really leery about going more than one night on the medication. I take Halcyon, a benzodiazepine, because I can even tell the next night that I'm going through, that I have trouble sleeping because of the single dose the night before. Anybody else on the panel want to weigh in on?
I can speak a little bit. Jim, you're the expert on the sleep, but I can tell a house story of being with House Story about sleeping. So we had a woman at the house who hadn't slept for, I don't know, maybe a week, maybe several days. And we were having a meeting, and she stood up and started talking like she was the head of the company. And she started talking about productivity was really not up. And somebody, raised their hand and said, Madam President or something, we feel that some of the workers are not productive because they haven't been sleeping. And can you suggest, basically they're asking her to suggest for herself, but can you suggest a way that we can help the workers become more productive by sleeping better? And she said, well, of course, they should take a melatonin and or a Benadryl and sleep. And that night, without anybody saying to her, you haven't slept, and she asked for, I think, a Benadryl or a melatonin, one of them, and she did sleep. And so that's what I mean about the house community really could resolve its own stuff.
I think this is an important area, and Soteria San Jose, I think, is unique in this area. That when you think about Soteria, the study was done with a specific group, small group of people, and in my role, except for the first two people, I was the one who went to the hospital, spent time, and brought the person back to the hospital. And you're talking about people who had no more than just a small amount of contact with the mental health system, and most of them have never been on medications. And one thing, almost, I would say 99% of the people who came to Soteria that fit this population had, within that few days before coming to Soteria, had not slept for a significant amount of time. I think there is some relationship between sleep and the things that they diagnose the DSM-3, like hallucination. I think there is a key relationship for this population. I think it's very different for people who are on medication, because sleep that comes with medication is very different than the natural sleep. And it has a huge effect. My sort of personal theory is that what we call hallucinating hearing voices is a process of dreaming while awake. Essentially, if you don't sleep, at some point that process of dream does sneak out, and we think of it as not being delusional, and no. That's why I say it's a normal process of human interaction. It's not a thing. And when you deal with this large population of people who hadn't been damaged by the system, you see, I think this is an area that needs to really be looked at intensely. People to avoid the mental health system altogether, that the medical model being treated, the treatment itself is damaging.
So I don't know if Tokyo or Natan or Morgan, do you have thoughts on this issue of dealing with people who aren't sleeping?
I personally actually have insomnia myself. I don't sleep often, and it was a thing where I wasn't able to take medication at the time because my daughter was so young. I wasn't able to take sleeping aids because I was worried about being able to wake up for her. So I had to find alternatives. I was offered valerian root and melatonin and all of those things, really. But I think it's more personal to the individual. For me, it was my mind was racing all of the time. My mind is constantly on go. It never, ever shuts off or stops. So for me, I had to occupy that. I started reading or doing puzzles or writing or whatever it was for me that could occupy my mind at the time, or even just embracing what I was actually thinking about to clear my head of the thing that I kept revisiting or going over and over again. But I think it's more specific to the individual. Most days, some people really do respond well to medication and sleeping aids, whereas I did not and could not, as an alternative, take those. So I had to find a different way. Some people work out, run. There's so many different avenues, but it is like, I believe it was Voice or someone that just mentioned, being able to not sleeping is likened to being intoxicated. And after a point, you're actually almost sleepwalking. And that is something that sometimes people can mistake for disassociation and things of that nature. Like stepping out, you needed a break, your mind provided a failsafe. And so for me, that's what it became. And that's what it can be if I don't get enough sleep. So just a matter of finding what brings comfort to you or what you're actually lacking to get that sleep. Sometimes it's just a matter of having too much going on in your life.
Great. So Al, did you want to say something about this?
No, I didn't want to talk about that, but I want to take advantage of my position on the panel to talk about, to answer a question that came up last week, Jim. I think what Tokyo said makes a lot of sense to me. Basically, I don't stay in bed for more than 15 minutes. If I'm not asleep in 15 minutes, I get up and I do something. I just sit and let whatever comes up come up until usually about an hour and a half. I'm sleepy again and go back. But I want to answer this question. Last week the question came up: can you do peer respite and soteria in home with a family? Do you have to have a place to do this at? Can you do it? Yeah, just in homes. To what extent can you do it? Well, you can't do a soteria in your house or a peer respite, but you can use the principles, I think, to make a difference. So I've worked with about six groups of parents of people who are going through extreme experiences, would be diagnosed with psychosis. And I've just helped them provide a safe, supportive, affirming environment for their loved one and be with. In other words, I encourage them to be with their loved one in the same way that we're talking about. Listen, understand what's going on, try to engage, support. And that has been helpful. And one of the really helpful things, Jim, is just giving people a different way to understand what's happening with their loved one. Because what they hear when they go to the conventional system is, you have a brain disorder, you're broken, you have a fundamental brain disorder, you're broken, and you need to take these drugs for the rest of your life. Well, when I help them have a different idea about what's going on with their loved one, it just seems to me your loved one, is somehow has found a way to survive, and seems to be kind of frightened, seem to be scared, in some ways terrified. Bert Karen, who was a great psychologist, who got to know people diagnosed with schizophrenia very well, he would say basically that these people are terrified about the world and about human beings for good reason. They have good reason to be terrified. Now, obviously that's not always the case. Some people are in a spiritual emergency, and I don't want to presume that I know what's going on. Everyone's going through a different experience. But when parents have this other way of understanding it, Jim, when they understand, oh, something's happened to my son, my daughter, that they've kind of been thrown in some way, and they're in this process of surviving, doing their best to move forward, and I'm just going to help them do that. That can make a big difference with a family. And so I actually had one of the mothers said to me, after I had been working with her for a while, and she said, seeing things this way makes it easier for me to love my son. It makes it easier for me to love him and be with him. And that's big. So yes, we can do this in families, in homes. It can be done.
Great. So I think I got a lot of hands up. I'm going to maybe try and focus on that. Diane, do you have a short comment or question? You're muted.
Okay, sorry. It takes a while to unmute. I'm on my phone. I was typing something about sleep. That'll be coming through in the chat in 1 second. But I was going back to the use of language. And I just wanted to say that I'm a strong proponent of using language that conveys more human-to-human contact as opposed to clinical, medical contact. So the effect on language is huge, and I look to Sherry Mead for her choice of words. But using language, it's very powerful. The effect of language is very powerful. So using words like care instead of treatment, experiences instead of symptoms, speaks volumes. It speaks to care, and it depathologizes, for lack of a better term. And then even the word recovery, to me, I have trouble with, because to me, I understand it, you know, points to the fact that people are possessed by demons. Okay, I get that. But recovery to me implies that's, I mean, it harkens back to, it pathologizes. It harkens back to the fact that somebody was sick. I have trouble with the term mental illness too. I like to talk about wellness. So as far as the recovery model, I think we're still locked into the medical model when we use terms that pathologize. So I like to think in terms of wellness and the 10 wellness principles, because they apply to everybody. And so we're all in the same boat. And when we're all in the same boat, yeah, I can double hands up. When we're all in the same boat, then it's not like we're the consumers. We're in this class. We're consumers. We've had mental health problems. And then other people who clearly, nobody's 100% well all the time. That other group, they think, well, we're not them, so we're okay. I think that helps with stigma, destigmatizing. We're one big happy human family. And so I see wellness on a continuum of, we just move back and forth, but we're all on the same continuum. And so I think that that can help convey to people who think they're well and we're not, that, you know, we're having problems. We're having some problems, and that they recognize they are too, and let's bring them along. And it's a discussion I want to have, because I got to clarify in my head, does mental illness even exist? Why do we have the DSM-4? I understand, you know, it's used in diagnoses. I hate to say I have a diagnosis myself. I like to just talk about my makeup, the way that I'm made up. So I'm looking for a conversation. I'm a strong advocate for use of language, and I have been for years, decades. It's not changing. I still hear symptoms. I still hear treatment. I still hear diagnosis. I still hear mental illness. So anyone looking for a dialogue, reach out, but I'm working on trying to have that. So that is my, oh, and then the other thing is just the term recovery. It's hard for me to use because it's always confused with recovery from substance use issues. So that's what I had to say. Importance of language.
Thanks, Diane. I think language is really important. And one of the things that drives me nuts is when people use ECT, electroconvulsive therapy. I always call it electroshock. People know what electroshock means, or shock. I'm going to try and work through the raised hands now. So Ian, if that's how you pronounce it, did you have a question? Oh, your hand just went down. You're muted.
There we go. There we go. How you going? Yeah, good. Hi. Look, I just on the language of recovery, you got to recognize the consumer movement is a social justice movement, and we've all grown our own way through that. I think it's very important that although there are a lot of people involved in this industry that have no lived experience, they all come to the industry with a willingness to do good. Problem is they are co-opted by history into a belief and a behavior that is different to the beliefs and behaviors of the consumer movement. One of the things that I quite often use is a quote from Martin Luther King that was, if you cannot be the person you are supposed to be, I cannot be the person I am supposed to be. And if I cannot be the person I'm supposed to be, you cannot be the person you are supposed to be. And that is a recognition that we are connected in some way all through our lives. We bump into the people we're supposed to bump into, and we have the relationships we have with those people along the way. One of the difficulties about language and people being co-opted into service provision is they then take on the language of the services that they work in, although they wish to do the good work they do. That overarching language, for example, recovery in drug and alcohol services is totally different from recovery in community-based mental health services. And it's different again when you're thinking about youth off the street programs where people are distressed and homeless at the age of 14. Recovery is a different thing for many different people depending on where they're coming from. And quite often the power imbalance says the health professionals are the ones that tell you what your recovery looks like. It's a shame, it's a real shame that that quote from Martin Luther King is not actually part of the education package and the humanistic provision of services. One of the things I've been involved in is educating mental health carers around lived experience and recovery itself and what recovery might mean for individuals. And yes, individual recovery is about reclaiming a meaningful, purposeful and contributing life, because people have a better sense of self when they actually value what they give to the world. And that's on the back of that quote from Martin Luther King. So I recognize that I just wanted to point out that the language has been co-opted and quite often consumer voice is still depowered within the service provisions. It's pretty important that we reclaim and quite often I see peer workers themselves are co-opted into service provision and they lose track of the principles of the consumer movement and that it is a social justice movement. It's about claiming my human rights to live a good quality life despite the diversity of that experience. And it's pretty important that we as a consumer movement, and we need to promote this to everyone we support, the history of the consumer movement as well, because without understanding the reclaiming of power process, people can't build on that process. They're lost and lonely and uneducated and unsupported in a system that has its own language and own power struggle to deal with. And I think one of the strong parts of the consumer movement is its history. We see this reflected right across the communities in which we work and we live. I mean, the gay rights movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, all these social justice issues, if you like, have caught up and overtaken the consumer movement because historically consumers have been left with no power. Because one of the things that leaves us with no power is the fact that we don't understand our history fully, and we don't place that history and strength of that history into services. When we lose that power, we become co-opted. I know peer workers that take notes and put notes in clinical files in hospital settings right next to psychiatry, treating psychiatrists' notes. And everyone on the care team can actually see that. That's not peer work. I can see people doing all sorts of things. For example, the very first peer job I had, I refused to have a set of keys. They offered me a set of keys to all the locked doors in the wards, and I refused to accept them because that in itself create a power imbalance between myself and the patients that were in that ward at the time. So actually understanding the power imbalance and the history of the consumer movement adds strength to making sure the peer workforce does not overbecome and co-opted into services.
Yeah, I think you make some really good points there, really important. Thanks, Ian. So Shirley, did you have a question or short comment that you wanted to ask?
Yes, I'd like to give a shout out to Eliza Ella and Ionia for the huge influence they have had on our family's lived experience. And my brother was on neuroleptics for many years, and I saw by changing the diet, he was like himself before he was ever on neuroleptics. We would have a very peaceful, loving home on neuroleptics, on our standard American diet. We had a very difficult, chaotic, sometimes many radios blaring and TVs. But when he would eat a lower protein, plant-based diet, he was his normal, peaceful, wonderful person to be around. And so I tried a macrobiotic diet, which they use, but that was not something he was interested in. But I found that just by lower protein, more fruit, and that he did very well. And then after that, I found the Russian work where after people fasted, when they stayed on a plant-based diet, that they did very well. So I'm thankful for her influence. And also at that time, we had many other people in our home. It was like sort of a drop-in center where people, but it was our home, but they were just our friends. But I started it really because I was having such a difficult time living alone with my brother. I'd had our mom move out because of the safety concerns. But I found by just doing fun things with other people that we did a lot of fun things, and just our home was open, that it was a blessing to me and to my brother. And then I think what's very most important about the nutrition part is after people are on neuroleptics, they can't go off rapidly. They usually need to be tapered slowly, especially at the end. And by either fasting a few days or a couple of days and a lower protein plant-based diet, it can help for people that want to withdraw. But I think it's very important to work with providers or where they get medication, because too many people have come up too rapidly and end up in jail. So I'm just thankful.
Great, thanks, Shirley. And for people's information, Shirley has written a book about diet and how helpful it can be. And maybe, Shirley, you could put the title of the book in the chat so people can find it if they want it.
Yes, I did. It's
okay.
Eat for Health, animalsplanet.com.
Great. So panel members, your time, we're a little past the allotted time, so your commitment has been satisfied. I think we're going to continue. I'm not going to be able maybe to continue as long as some people, but we're going to keep going. Huguette, did you want to say something?
Yes, I want to say that we need to end the formal session and to invite the people to stay with us, who have the time to stay with us, and to thank the people who want to leave us. So Stan, you will add something?
I wanted to thank everybody who is here today. Again, you know, the passion and the dedication to this work and to our values is inspiring. We will be doing another version of Nuts and Bolts Day next week. We will be talking about what we've titled the administrative container. So think about a box with all the tools inside it. I think that's what's implied there. We're going to have some great panelists, and Jen, in fact, will be moderating next week's discussion. I'm struck by all the questions. They're very deep, and they have so many different answers depending on where you are, what your contexts are. And I think that's an important part of our conversation. We have to accept each other's views and consider that what works for me might not work for someone else. I have a list of 100 tricks for recovering your balance, you know, when you experience emotional distress. 50 of them are triggers for me, you know, but they probably work for someone else. So we have to keep that in mind. I personally would like to thank the panelists who joined us today. Again, you guys are brilliant. You've been doing this. You've got so much knowledge about how this is done. And yet I also sense that we're all still figuring out one day at a time how this stuff works. And it's exciting. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to stick around, and I think a number of us, I think we can consider this the official end to the 3 hour